So here's what we've got today. This is a 1960 Fb Holden Ute. My father-in-law and I have been working on this on and off for quite some time, and the Ute was given to him by his uncle. So it's been in the family for quite some years. But we haven't had a lot of time to work on it, and that's all changing today. And the body, it's not that bad. The quarters are pretty clean, dented, but not overly rusty. And into the door. These things were bad for rust in the tops of the guards here, and there's a little speck. But mostly in these eyebrows, because as they drove along dirty roads and muddy roads, the mud would flick up into the eyebrow and sit on top of the headlight cup. And if you see, she's rusty in that cup, and a bit rusty above that cup too. But as far as panels go, it's pretty solid in the sill. A little bit of cancer creeping into the bottom of the quarter, and just here into that quarter too. Bit around the fuel neck. But she's been outside for a long time. You can tell by the rubbers all perishing and shrinking. She wasn't shedded, she was just sat out in the open. But all in all, you'd think good place to start, right? Or maybe not. But that's where the good news ended for this one. When it was dragged out of the paddock, it was almost hard to fathom that the outside of the car and the underside of the car were the same car. The outside of the body, you could nearly knock the rust over in a weekend, maybe 3 days. It's just not that bad. But the underside of the car was totally different. I don't know whether debris had built up in the back or an animal had built a house underneath, but to give an extent of the floor rust, the leaf spring was bolted to the frame, bolted to the diff, and at the front it had the bolt in it, but there was nothing left. And I'm not talking just a rust hole. I mean, you couldn't wrap your arms around this rust hole. There was more or less nothing from one side of the sill to the other. And unfortunately, that's the bit you can't get. Even back then, we've had this for a couple of years, and like I said, it's been at the father-in-law's place. We get a couple of weeks here and there through the year, but it's just taken too long. And back then, you couldn't get floor pans for it. You could get fronts like the sedan, but you couldn't get a rear, and you couldn't get the rear section that this thing really needed. The rust was so bad, it had rotted through the floor, through the top of the fuel tank, through the bottom of the fuel tank, and there was just nothing left. There was just literally nothing left to weld to. So with this one, I kind of want to go through the whats, the whys, and the hows. The what is obviously, it's a 1960 Fb Holden Ute. The why save something so rusty? Well, there was that family sort of connection. It's been in the family a long time. But to touch on the how do you save something that's that badly rusted? Like I said, we started this a few years back, and I don't know about now, but back then you couldn't even get the rear floors, let alone the rear fuel tank area and the leaf spring mount. It was completely gone. It literally was not attached to anything. Try to drag it on the trailer and the diff would just move like it wasn't attached to anything. And probably the only way I could think to actually approach it was to start by cutting all the rust out. And I don't mean in the body, I mean in the floor. So I literally took a grinder to it, and I literally cut everything out from sill panel to sill panel, and from firewall to tailgate, and just took the whole lot out, including the Y-frames in the front end that the front end on these bolt to. And this is a 64, but it has a similar front end. To explain what I mean by the Y-frame, you see that section there? That is the Y-frame, and then it bolts into the inner guards, and I've cut across there and took all that Y-frame out. The big block EH will be back shortly too. And so with the whole floor front end removed and cut away, you're more or less starting with a rust-free, I don't know, shell. Remember those models as a kid? You'd have the body and you just put it over the floor pan. That's essentially what I had. Just the quarters, the sills, everything you see there, but nothing underneath. It was just hollow like a little model. And the thought crosses your mind to try to find another floor pan, but that's needle in a haystack kind of stuff. And if you found one, are you cutting up a better car than you're trying to save? Well, absolutely you would be. So I didn't go that route. And it might have been sleep deprivation from working night shift and maybe the odd beer that gave me the thought process of, why not put some strength back into the car by welding a frame into it and then put it over a chassis. So this one's completely different, you'll see. So this time on Backshed, we're saving what I consider the unsavable. So these guys are what's called a monocoque body, or one piece. The frame rails are part of the body as well as the floor, and then they had the Y-frame that bolts away. So technically the structure of the car at the rear is all one piece except for the Y-frame that bolts on. But what I'm saying is, if I welded strength into the sill panels and made a frame to strengthen the body back up, why couldn't I just put a chassis underneath it? So that's what I've done. From the rear of the car it becomes fairly obvious, but that's a full chassis. And the way I went about it was welding 75 by 50 RHS down the sill panels, which that's them there. And then just starting to build a frame off that. 40 by 40 tube across here, back here, and then just trying to mount the rear of it the way you would if you were just bolting a tray on, just with simple bolts and rubber mounts. And you can see the underside of the sill, there's the RHS welded to the original sill panel, just spot welded. And as I say, just start stitching together a frame to try and put some strength back into the shell itself, so you're turning a monocoque body into a cab over chassis body. So this is kind of what it should have looked like. And if you see, the frame rail runs down into the floor, it's all one piece. All the floor, it's all one piece, all welded to the frame, or all spot welded to the frame. But that was all gone in the FB. And if you see, this one should have a frame rail there. There's the remnants of the frame rail, and it should run straight down there, fuel tank there, but it's all gone. It was the only way to start with something, was just to cut it from there to there, take everything out. And I know that might seem a little bit extreme, but the rust was like I'd never seen before. So to give you a better idea, we'll get Mucus out of the shed, pop him up on the lift, and I'll show you a little bit more underneath him. So up on the hoist, to give you a better indication of the sleep deprived and alcohol induced decisions that were made, you can see there's the RHS, rectangle hollow section. And you see every pressed bump in that sill, if you want to call them that, I've spot welded to all the way down, right down to the back of the sill. And then from the back of that RHS, I've got a 40 by 40 bar going up with a small plate on the side there and a mounting pad, and then just extend it through there so that I could bolt this chassis on more or less the way it would have been done from a factory. And if you see, here's the factory chassis mounting points, and even the factory chassis mounts because That's the floor that came with the chassis. If you see, it's a maroon colour. And the mount up there as well. And it's got a torsion bar front end, so no springs up front. If you see, there's just the shock and the torsion bar running back that way. And so if I drop him back down, I'll show you the floor pan inside the car. I've actually retained the floor from the donor vehicle and the mount, so it's now mounted with factory mounting points, and then I've made the frame for the back just as if you bolt a tray onto a vehicle, but I've welded it to the FB body. So the floor pan is welded into the FB body, the frame at the back's welded into the FB body, and I've just bolted it down. That's a monocoque body turned into a cab over chassis. Have a look inside. And if you see there, that's the floor pan out of the donor vehicle. There's the factory mounts. And there. And then I've just stitched the floor to the firewall. There's the bits we're going to get to shortly. And if you see here where the floor meets the original floor, that's the FB floor cut there. That's the 75 by 50 RHS. That's fresh steel that I bent 15mm, 65mm rise, 15mm, and then I've plonked the factory floor on top of that step up. So I've essentially channeled the floor into this FB body 65mm and mounted it all on top of 75 by 50 RHS tube. So what sort of chassis? It was actually a 1985 pre-emissions two-wheel drive Toyota Hilux chassis with a 2.4 petrol and an automatic. So another one of the whys that pop into your mind, why a Toyota Hilux chassis? Well, a couple of reasons. Very strong little diffs. Ford stud pattern, so that gives you a lot of different wheels to pick from, but the main reason was it was only 15mm wider than the factory FB wheel track. No, wheelbase. No, wheel track. Yeah, wheel track, not wheelbase. I'll get to wheelbase, all right? And the fact it's only 15mm over, has a Ford stud pattern or a 5-stud Toyota stud pattern, which happens to be the same as the Ford. It just gives you a lot of options for wheels, maybe to correct that 15mm over track. The actual length of the chassis, I had to shorten by 186mm, which here in Australia, a lot of you guys are probably already thinking, gonna need inspections, engineering, all that. Yeah, it is. Commercial guidelines, however, are a little less strict than passenger vehicles. So for instance, if that was a sedan, yeah, hoops to jump through. There's still hoops to jump through, they're just not as strict as commercial vehicles. So you can actually shorten a chassis. If you've seen 6-wheeled commercial vehicles or that sort of thing, you can modify the chassis to a degree. So I've taken the punt, chopped it off, brought it in 186mm, like I said. The track's 15mm over, correcting that with wheels. These are actually the wheels that came on the Toyota Hilux. And then of course, like I said, it was a 2.4 litre 4-cylinder automatic. So the easy option was to leave the 2.4 4-cylinder and the automatic in it. Nope, not doing that. This is where I got creative license. I figure if I'm gonna go to that extreme, I've got to put my little touch on it. So I chucked in an engine that I had sitting on my shed floor for quite some years. So by cutting out the rear frame, the rear floor, the Y-frames, I took a lot of strength away, right? And by making the frame, you know, the 40B40 and the RHS frame, I put a lot of strength back into bolted to the chassis. So I got creative license and thought, why not throw some power at it? That is a 400 cubic inch small block Chevy. I just happened to have one sitting on the floor at the time. It's got a turbo 350 behind it. I'm just going to make it work. See a little set of headers tucked down the edges there. But we'll go a bit deeper into the whats and hows. So just in case you're deciding to get sleep deprived and 3 parts drunk and making ridiculous decisions yourself, let's go through actually the bits that required to make this all come together. If you can imagine, the chassis had its own braking system, the chassis had its own steering box and front suspension, and it all still worked. I literally pulled apart a driving Toyota Hilux that I paid next to nothing for. The first thing I guess we can go through is the steering. So the first thing I had to do was a different steering column, because the FB steering box was one piece shaft all the way to here. Now in an accident they're considered basically a harpoon, and so if you're going to modify older cars you must put a collapsible section in it, and this one is out of HK, I believe, HK collapsible column shaft, but this section here is actually EH with the indicators. Believe it or not, the FB did not have indicators. This was the Poverty Pack FB, being a commercial, and if you see, that's the column out of it. There's no indicator stalk. Should have been here. It's not there. If you look at the front, there's no Parker lamp, whereas the guys with indicators would have had indicator there and a Parker lamp in the bottom of the headlight, and then your normal low and high beam up here. I like this style of thing. If you see down the bottom, there's the Parker there, and then the rest of your lamp there. That would have been in the FBs with indicators. This guy did not. So that's why I used EH steering column to get the indicator mechanism and the indicator wiring, and we'll just have to rewire these guys later. So then with the EH column, I just hacked him off there, but that actually leaves you that diameter, not this bit in the middle, just the outer diameter there, and that's the original EH steering shaft. So you're going to have an outer diameter like that, and it's just going to flop around. So I inserted a bearing. I found the OD outside diameter and ID inside diameter of the shaft housing, and just found a bearing with the same outside diameter and inside diameter, and put it in here and just recessed him up in there, and then clamped it from the inside. That's just so that shaft can spin on its own, but still be supported laterally, so it can't move side to side, up or down. It's supported by a bearing. The next bit, which you probably saw a little bit of there, it's going to need to change direction. The steering box couldn't stay because it's way up here on the Hilux, and if I used the FB column, it was way back inside the engine bay. So somehow steering box here, column here, it's got to change direction a couple of times. So there's little universal joints you can just get from any hot rod store or anything like that, and it comes with a different type of rod called a DD shaft. If you see, if you turn it that way and draw a line down the middle, that side makes a D and this side makes a D. So it's called a DD shaft. Those little universal joints, which I'll show you in one section, actually clamp onto the flat side so that they can't spin on the shaft. And it's that little fella there, that's a universal joint with just grub screws stopping it from spinning. And that's essentially all I did to make the two together. The column, or the shaft, coming from the steering column outside the firewall, and this guy, I just ground some flat sections onto that guy, whacked it into the universal so it can actually turn like that, but still when you're turning together. But I still need to change direction a couple of more times. If you look down here, you can actually see there's the factory Toyota Hilux steering box, there's the factory Toyota Hilux rag joint, and that's actually the steering shaft from the Toyota Hilux right up to there, and that's when I've cut it off and done exactly the same thing. I've flattened both sides, cut the flat side into both of them, put another joint, and this little guy with a bracket off the side there, that's just to support that shaft, because you've got a change direction there, a change direction there, so if you spun the steering wheel over, it could actually flop about. It wouldn't stay straight and it wouldn't stay out of the way, so I needed to put that support in there to hold it straight and that rod in place. So all that really is a rear end Heim joint, you know, from drag racing or whichever. They actually listed as Heim joint, a steering support Heim joint, and that guy slides through that, spins freely, and it allows movement on any angle. So you can have that bolted square and your steering angles changed, but it's still supporting the steering, so you're not getting that shaft wanting to move out of the way with the two universals. It all looks fairly complex. There's a couple of joints there, but it just moves it over away from the small block Chevy and uses the factory steering box. So I've now got factory steering components. I haven't had to custom make anything. It is literally Toyota Hilux front suspension torsion bars right up to the steering box. So with that guy moved over out of the way, joined up to the factory box, next thing was brakes. So as far as the brakes went, they're untouched. That's the factory brake line on the factory diff. I haven't modified it, I haven't shortened it. And then there's this line traveling forward. And where I cut the chassis there, I just took all the mounting points for the brake line off. So I just pulled it forward, put a bit of a loop in it, didn't cut it whatsoever, so there's essentially 186 mils of excess brake line there. Screwed it back into this little divider and didn't cut any lines, used the factory line. And once you come up into the engine bay, I've just used the factory lines again, re-bent. You can sort of see, they're not bent perfectly, but they are the factory lines. That one had a different fitting on it, so I have got a different fitting there. But the only brake line I had to remake was this guy here. He goes up, across here. That again is the factory line, joined there, and then down to the other side. So there was literally only one line from there to there that I've remade. Every other line is factory, every other brake is factory. I haven't changed the drums, the lines, the discs, or any of those lines. We just added that line in. It is factory 85 Toyota Hilux disc drum combination. This is the only modification as far as the factory Toyota Hilux brake booster was really wide, and to get it over, that hinge would have had to have completely gone. So I used an 8-inch brake booster and a hot rod aftermarket master cylinder and just plumbed it into that. As I said, the only thing I had to change was that one fitting. This one, luckily, screwed straight in. So we now have working brakes, and it is a bit of a Frankenstein, and in the back of my head, I have been calling it Frankie. You know, it's cobbled together shit, but by the same token, now with working steering and working brakes, the only other thing you would have needed is a working fuel system to get a motor to run. And the fuel system, stock Toyota Hilux. So the fuel tank I left in place. Unfortunately, the filling neck is on the wrong side for the FB. That's where the FB filling neck is, but that's a small issue. We'll get to that in a while. But that's the factory mounting position. I haven't changed anything there. I will have to design something for a filler neck. And down there is the small block Chevy pump. So the factory line came right to the front of the motor, and all I've done is cut it off, fitted a rubber line straight to that pump. And so with a fuel system, you could have now fired the original motor. That seemed like no fun, so in went the Chev. It had its own little challenges. Had to make engine mounts, had to make a transmission mount. It has a turbo 350 in it with a 3000 RPM stall converter. But I'll lift him back up, we'll go onto the mounts, go onto the tranny mount, and take a look at these headers. So these are the factory top control arms for the Hilux. And these are just cheap, generic block hugger headers. And they cleared. I got real lucky on that. I was prepared to move heaven and earth to get a set of headers down there. They are about 200 bucks off eBay, and they clear everything. I couldn't believe it. Even the steering shaft, that's why I had to space him across, pull this guy in, clears everything. Look at that. If I wrote that down in a book of what I've done to this and wrote, and I bought cheap headers and they fit perfectly, somebody would go, bullshit. You can buy expensive headers designed for a car and an engine and they don't fit, but seriously they did. If you have a look here where they've dumped, they've cleared everything. I'm going to have to put a fairly sharp turn in it to head down that way. And look again on the steering side, it clears everything. Got a clear pathway straight down if you want to come. $200 headers. Crazy, huh? So the mounts, from memory, I think I bought a HK Holden to Chev mount, and then I just made the plated sections and welded it to the factory chassis. And the same with that guy. I've still got some welding to do, but that's the sort of stuff we're going to get into this episode. And maybe move that clamp up, I suppose, as well. It's just a cheap aluminium radiator too, but I'll get to that. Had a deep pan on it. This was already on the motor, and I'll get to the motor later on, but this pan was already on the motor, but as you see, the sway bar would have ran here and what it was out of. But in the Hilux, it was a bit farther back, and you were really going to have sump clearance issues. It's only a sway bar. I just made a spacer to space it down. It's still going to do the same job. It's just that angle is a little bit changed. But here's where it got weird. I had a turbo 700R for this, but it would have meant I had to cut the cross member. You can't cut the cross member because it's part of the suspension. This is torsion bar suspension. So this is actually what would be front springs. And so I had to leave the cross member and get a shorter box, which is the 3-speed automatic instead of a 4-speed. And then I've just welded a plate on the front and used the factory mount. The tail shaft on the Hilux used to have a center bearing here, but I've actually removed the center bearing and just got a one-piece drive shaft. I still got to tidy up a bit of the junk under here, but that's the basics. That's the essentials. Looks like I've got a bit of straightening to do here, but anyway, we'll get to that. So we're going through everything that we've done as far as motors mounted, transmissions mounted, steering works, brake works. So what's left to do? Heaps. I haven't finished the mounts on the front of the chassis. I haven't finished the mounts on the back of the chassis. The back of the cab hasn't been mated to the floor, and you see there's a hole in the transmission tunnel. The main thing we've got to do in this episode is, one, build an exhaust. I want to do that before I fire the motor because I've lost track of how long that motor's been sitting for. It would be at least a decade. I'd be almost certain of it. And it's not stock. It had a fairly healthy cam in it, so I'd say we've got some sad valve springs and things like that. It'll definitely need remove the distributor, prime the oil system, but that's where we're going to start. We've got to get some wiring to get some power to it, remove the distributor, prime up the oil system, build an exhaust system. Let's stop talking. Let's just get into it. Probably the first place to start is I started piecing together some wiring. If you see, I've labelled a little bit of it. I do know they're the starter wires, those two. That'd be for the starter solenoid. That'd be for the starter power itself. And then we're just got to work through bits and pieces. That's for the fan. Oh, that's another thing. I didn't have room for an engine-driven fan. I've got it. It looks tight there, but I've got about 9mm, maybe 10. And that's just a cheap aluminium radiator, but I've got a very cool thermostat in it. We're just going to see how it goes. If I have to go bigger and come forward, that radiator for now is just to get it to run. And a lot of this wiring is going to have to be altered because that's a voltage regulator from the old grey motor and, you know, the grey motor generator, but that's a later model alternator with its own regulator and its own custom mounting bracket. Was I in a hurry that day? Maybe. Stacking nuts. I think that bracket actually came off an old Mercruiser engine, hence the big chunk of whatever hanging out there. I just cut it off, made it fit, lined it up so it was somewhat straight and went, well, that's done, move on. As I said, we got very small windows of time to try and work on Frankie, so I tried to get as much done as I could, as quickly as I could, but this is where we're going to change. First thing I guess I do is check if it's got oil, and no, it doesn't. So I might just pop it in the air, knock the plug out and just see if it was drained when it was removed. As I said, I've never had this running. So let's see if it's got oil in it first. Well, it's got some oil in it. I'll take this out in the sun and see if I can see metal all through it. It's black, but I can't see anything shimmering in the sun. And I guess that's the punt you take buying stuff secondhand off marketplace, but Or gum tree, it was that long ago. Anyway, let's keep going. It's been a long time since I've been under here, but it's all starting to come back to me. It really is a work of art. Abstract art, I'll give you that, but redneck art, redneckery artwork. That's what it should be called. I might even have a little change of plan. See, I was going to pull that distributor, prime the oil system. I might just fit an oil gauge while I'm under here, because it's not stock. And if you build a not stock motor, would you put a high volume pump in it? You probably would. So I wonder if I can put a bit of power to it and give it 2 or 3 good cranks with an oil pressure gauge and check the oil pressure coming up that way, rather than pulling the distributor out going that way. Anyway, keep doing something, Mike. Keep doing something. I will easily fit a gauge in there. Yep. This is supposed to have a high stall converter in it as well. I was told up to 3.5 grand, 3,500 RPM that is, and by looking at that, I reckon it's right. Get a go at the size of this converter. Look at that little fella. That is quite small. And that does have bearing on the stall speed. If you see a really tiny converter, you can guarantee it's not stock. I guess that's a conversation for another day, but essentially it's all to do with fin angle. If you get a big stock converter, you can get it to stall high, just dropping back to fin angle, but you don't get good drive. So the smaller converter you go, the steeper you can have your fin angle and get good drive, but still high stall speed. So that's a very small converter. So I don't doubt that's a 3.5 grand or thereabouts. If we stop talking and just get it running, then we can test it. And if you're familiar with small block Chevys, you know that there's a plug just above the oil filter, and that's where your oil pressure gauge will go in. So I'll knock that guy out, and I'll knock that filter out, mainly because I know I have one. How do you just have a small block Chevy filter? It's a small block Chevy. We have a number of them. In fact, if you're born in the States, you get that little ankle tag, a birth certificate, and a small block Chevy filter. Every child gets one. You get this everywhere. That's right. I'm now using my parts bucket as an oil catch as well. That goes good. It lubes up the bolts when you go to put them back in. I'd say she's been sitting that long. Yeah, it's been sitting that long. It ain't running out of anywhere. I might actually tip that out onto a tray and see, just in case. I know there's conversations around it as far as, oh, that was close. Check this out. I was gonna say, let's do this bit. There's conversations around fill your filter, don't fill your filter. I'm definitely a fill your filter. But I'll show you one of the tiny little, one of the little pitfalls of small block Chevy oil change. And this has happened to me. I had a ski boat. This did it. Check this out. Okay, so that's the new filter. And I'll just wipe a bit of oil around that ring while I think about it. And yeah, they're a little bit different internally, but it doesn't matter. But look at that one. What's it missing? Where is it? It's right there. And what happens is you put the new filter on, so you've double stacked the O-ring, and then you twist it up tight, fire it up, and oil pisses out between those two O-rings. And it was down in the hull of a ski boat. So you're reaching right down into the hull, knock the filter off. I didn't look at the filter, chucked the new one on, and guess what? It pissed everywhere, and I mean everywhere. It emptied the sump just about, because you couldn't see it and you couldn't smell it. It's not like it's in a car where it drips straight onto a hot exhaust. The boat didn't have a hot exhaust, it had water exhaust. It wasn't a great day that day, anyway. That's done. Get that gauge in and let's get rocking. So we've got a little drama. That's the plug. As you see, it's a plug. And that's the oil pressure sender. Different thread, different diameter. But I don't throw away a lot of little fittings like that. That ain't it. That's not going to help. That's the exact opposite. That's that thread at that end and that thread at that end. What's the odds of that? Actually, I would say pretty good, because there's another one. Yep. So that must be a fairly standard thing that comes with gauges, because oh, and there's another one. Yep. That proves that. That must be a standard sort of a thing that comes with gauges, because I have 3 of them. There you go. Keep that guy. He can go in there. 4 of them. I've just popped a little bit of thread sealant just on that thread there, because I don't want oil leaks. I've got to find the thread before I have to worry about it leaking. But get a go at this. Clearance for days, all the way around it. I'm telling you, it's redneck art. Just imagine that art gallery. All the redneckery art. I'd call it the Gallery of Glorious Redneckery, where sleep deprived and alcohol fueled dreams come to exist. Yes. Alright, I got the plan. Knock the plugs out, a little bit of WD, that lubes the bores a little, then we'll just hit it with a jump wire across the starter, prime the oil pressure, then we'll move on to some spark. Done. It's about 6 litres. I can't imagine that sump being any bigger than that. Make sure you get plenty of oil on the headers. You want some smoke when you start it up. So oil's in, and I've just ran a wire up to here. Now that's not a mechanical oil gauge, it's a electric oil gauge. Difference is, mechanical oil gauge, you run an oil pipe as such to the back of your gauge, so it's actually checking the oil pressure at the gauge. That sender, however, sends an ohms reading, an ohms of resistance, so I don't even need to connect the gauge to that just yet. I've only got to put my multimeter in there on ohms, roll it over, and when the ohms change, you know you've got pressure for now. Then I'll worry about the gauge. But right now, I'm going to start sifting through. I've obviously done some wiring, because that's labelled. Get rid of that rag, Mike. That's labelled starter. That's obviously my main power to my fuse box. And then we've got, that's coming from the electric fan, so that's obviously got to go to a ground sender that'll turn the fan on and off. I don't know where that one's, it's a big negative, so you have to assume that's the earth for my fuse box. I better have a look what I've done inside, because I have actually done a little bit clearly, but I've got to pick up where I left off so we can get this starter to wind, and then at least we can prime some oil pressure. There's quite a few hanging around. What's that? Oil switch. That must have been for the little red idiot light, you know, when you're out of oil. Don't know if I'll have that on this motor, but still. And the green one, nothing. That's probably factory temp light. It's obviously been somewhere hot. That's got a heat shield that's all melted, so those two might not be relevant to us right now. But let's get some of this sorted out and take a look inside. I've got a little bit done under here. Do I trust myself? Well, what's that one? That might be my power from the ignition in to switch the relays. Have I labelled it? Have I gone one step further? That's got to be my ignition with the fuse in it. That'd be fan. So I wonder what that one is. I don't know, but it's exciting, all of them, so that's good. Alright, let's do up that. Chuck a battery in it. And see if I get some power at the starter wires. So I can now shed some light on what that little box is. It's a circuit breaker. But I think I've got it wired wrong. Very wrong. I'm nearly certain that I had that wired into the negative side. Let me look at that again. That doesn't make sense. Oh no, that would be right. So from all of that, I reckon if I connect those two starter and starter solenoid, if we just connect them, we can then off the hoist, roll it forward and start weeding through this other garbage. I've dropped my two starter wires down the back there and connected them up, but we've got to chuck a battery in it so I can get some of this sorted out. But I want to roll him forward away from the hoist just so I can get inside a little better, get under the dash and make, I don't know, make sense of what I've done there before. Right now I'm sort of thinking, is that right, isn't it right? Let's just go through it, make sure it's right, and then chuck a battery at it and not have it burst into flames. So don't get me wrong, everything's soldered and heat shrinked and heat shrinked. It's got heat shrink stuff around it, that's what I'm saying, on the inside there. So I think I probably had a fairly educated crack at it. Let's have another look, see where we got to. So the two I think I need to concentrate on is this. We'll call him a pinky coloured wire, and that, I guarantee you, that is ignition. That will go to the distributor. That guy goes across to there, and that guy goes back in there. I'm just wondering where I'm getting power from, or did I just run out? Did I just run out of red wire? Is that my red wire? That's what I've got to figure out. Okay, so it's making more sense now. Clearly this pink guy here, this funny pink guy here, has got to be power, right? And that does too. That's a circuit breaker, so that's got to be power as well. And that's breaking the power. So yep, I've just ran out of red wire. That is to go to the battery. That's my hard power in. I'm calling it hard power, which loops around to give power to, that is my ignition wire through a relay. So I've got soft power here coming from the ignition that's going to activate every relay. Don't know what that one's for. Maybe it's a spare, haven't figured it out yet, nothing hooked up, but that's, so this little looped guy is soft power in and negative to activate the relay for ignition, activate the relay for the fan. So I just need to do that guy up, chuck a battery at it and see if we've got an ignition. So it looks like it's all right, and what threw me is that black wire. Obviously I've just ran out of red wire, so I've put a black wire as my hard power in, and I found this in the box of parts, and that's how I know that's a circuit breaker. I didn't recognize it as that because I don't usually use them, but I whacked him in there as part of the fan relay. That's obviously what they gave me to wire the fan. And so we've got a breaker. Whether it needs to be there or not, I don't know. I just did it according to this. So let's just chuck a battery in this thing, see where we've got power, and then if we've got power, we'll roll it over without ignition on. So it'll wind but won't fire. We've got no fuel, so it won't fire anyway, but yeah, let's do that. So chuck that back in the cab, get a battery. I'm sure I had a clamp here somewhere, but anyway, that can wait. These are way too long, but I can worry about that again. It's another thing that can wait. Okay, so that's a total shit show. I'll have to fix that later. For now, let's see what happens when we click power to it. I should get power here. Oh, I'll just check everything in. They're just clicking and doing what it's supposed to do. So now if I leave that key on, now if I ground this, I think we should. Alright, so we've got power everywhere. Did I tell you I broke the distributor? I don't think I did. When I was, turn the key off, Michael. Right, now, when I was lifting the motor in, I actually took the distributor cap off, thinking, well, if I hit that on the firewall, because there's not much room, I'll break it. So I took the cap off and I didn't break the cap. I broke the rotor button because I hit that on the firewall. So next thing is cap off. I might have another rotor button. That's the upside. Let's get that cap off. So I just removed the distributor cap, and like I said, I took all the leads and the cap off, but I touched the rotor button, which is this guy, on the firewall, and that should have a metal strap there, and it snapped that little piece there and broke the button out. So I might be able to just knock that screw and that screw out and lift that button out, and if I can, I think I have another one. It'd be nice if I do have the same button, because that'll save me pulling that out if I can get oil pressure, and we'll get to that in a second with my little white wire. Right. See there's the bit I snapped off. Anyway, so this is why I say I might have another button. This is not an expensive distributor, and neither was that one. And this is actually out of a Ford Cleveland, but the aftermarket basically that's a GM style HUI coil over the distributor type of distributor with a Ford base on it. So I think the button might be the same. That's why I have a spare. That is a combination of Ford Cleveland gear driving the oil pump with a high volume oil pump, which is a lot of load on the distributor shaft, and a cheap distributor. So broke it cold. The best bit is you broke it above the gear, not below the gear. If they snap there, the engine stops. If it snaps below the gear, which I have seen, the engine keeps running, but the oil pump does not. You Cleveland guys know what I'm talking about. Everyone's had that horror story. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do some looking for numbers, but geez, that looks promising. Excellent, no numbers whatsoever. I'll tell you what, that's good enough for me. In it goes. Fortunately, I have exceptionally low standards and even lower expectations. Now, if I leave that coil, distributor cap and coil in one to the side and hit that key, technically it should wind over. Wire over? Probably not. Wind over. We've even got volts. I got the ohm meter because I'm going to check the ohms of that pressure sender. Remember I was saying that doesn't need a gauge. Ohms change, you know you got pressure. So let's just see if it's going to click over first. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, but that battery sounds really poor. Yeah, that went to 9 volts. So I'm going to quickly chuck a charger on that and get ready to test my ohms. Righto, so charger first. So we've got a charger, having a go at that. And notice I skipped the remove plugs WD down the holes. Yeah, to just, you know, sometimes you wing it. I've got to tell you, I got a fair bit of confidence in this motor. Once I saw the oil wasn't full of metal. I've had it for ages, it's been stored inside. I'm trying to make excuses as to why I don't need to do stuff, alright? That's all it is. I just, whatever. Now, ohms, I need to so if that changes, inconclusive evidence at this point. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? Nothing. Grounded to the block, that should be enough, because the sender's grounded to the block. Okay, so you're seeing me fail miserably here with my theory on the ohms. I don't know whether I can't get a good enough ground here, or I should be doing it over there. I should be touching on the can, touching on my wire, seeing if the ohms change, but I can't be here winding. So these are the gauges that I bought God knows how many years ago, specifically, can't even talk, for this moment. Fire it up, but I was going to do it a lot slower and install them correctly. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it correctly. I'm literally going to clip onto that guide. Wish it was pre-recorded. I'd be heaps better if it was pre-recorded. Like smarter. Idiot. Wouldn't be as much fun though, huh? Watch along and you can fail as miserably as I do. This isn't a fail. If this runs, this is glorious. As I said, it's artwork. Ohms on the other one. So that's essentially, without arcing it out on the guard, that's essentially tricking it into think it's got positive, negative and ohms. So let's see what that does. Still nothing. Oh, did it? It did move. Oh, yep, it's got pressure. Show you why I know that. Oh. And I've got good news, we've got oil pressure. We probably, given the amount of oil that I can now hear running out underneath the car, I'd say we had oil pressure a lot longer, a lot before I heard it and saw it. That's oil at the firewall. I've actually used that technique before. I'll show you what happened. There's most of my oil. No, not really. It's a bit of a leak. Remember I was talking about mechanical gauges and electric gauges? Well, there, right there, there's a mechanical gauge tube. With no cap on it. So the mechanical gauge has been unscrewed, engine pulled. I've got oil pressure. I have no idea why I didn't cap that when I put the engine in. This would be the stupidity bus coming to get me. He's doing stupid shit again. Quick, let's get him. No, drove past. Anyway, keep going. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they had a leaking issue they've absolutely drowned that in either Loctite or thread sealant or something, because that was butt puckeringly frightening that I was going to snap that, strip that or whatever. But I think I got it. Now I just got to find a thread that's the same, that clears the manifold, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. I just got my hands full at present. So that's all it is. Oh Jesus, look at the bottom threads, how clean they are. Are they cross-threaded? Oh no, maybe that's just a bit of paint, but that's essentially what I was dealing with. That goes into the block, your fitting goes over there, your rubber hose, or your plastic hose they actually are, goes into your gauge. But I'll find something like that, will block off that hole, start all over again. Took me 25 minutes, but I found a bolt. And touch wood, it's long enough, because that was near touching the manifold, it's long enough that's going to be okay. So I put a little bit of, I don't know, Permatex or thread seal or something on that, whack that in. I'll just clean up around that thread and chuck him in. I know we've got oil pressure now, because it's all over the floor. So the cap might go back on. Isn't it funny? I started off by going, well, I'll pull the dizzy and I'll prime it with oil pressure. Nope, didn't do that. Oh, we'll knock the plugs out and we'll put WD down the cylinder so it winds faster. Nope, didn't do that. Oh, we'll put an exhaust on it before we fire it. Nope, don't think I'm going to do that. I'll tell you why, every time I've gone to do something, there's little cues or little something telling me that I think it'll be fine. I'm winding that over. I'm not hearing any clanking, no lifter tick, no nothing. In actual fact, even over the noise of that charger, I can actually hear the oil draining back into the sump. So the top end's got oil pressure. I'm not hearing a lifter clatter. I'm not hearing a clunk. I'm not hearing anything. So in a funny way, I do want to hear something, and that's those shorty headers bark. So I'll chuck this on, plug in the, where'd it go? Where's my power wire? There. Plug in me distributor power. You saw we had that. Maybe run some fuel up to this pump. I don't know, see if we can't get a little bark out of it, and if we do that, then we'll put an exhaust on it. I promise. Talk about shifting the goalposts. Okay, so here's where we're at now. Number one, charging. But I've got the fuel line into a bottle so we can start seeing if the pump's going to pump. Our power is on the distributor, and I've tapped into that fuel line there, and I'm running back to a bottle here. Now the idea that is, don't fill the tank, got a weld there. When it's time to weld, flip that out, no explosions. So that should be okay. But now if I can put a little bit in the carby and we've got spark, maybe that'll bark over a couple of times, enough to suck some fuel up and hopefully get that fuel line filled up. So let's do that. I'm going to squirt a bit of fuel down the bowl of that thing, give it a couple of pumps and see if we can get some noise out of it. I've thrown all the precautions out the window, WDing and rolling over and priming, and just going to wing it. So far, this is brand new. Oh, I tell you what I haven't done. I was going to say this carby is brand new, but I haven't connected up the vacuum advance. The vacuum advance on these distributors can be a bit of a pain. They're the first thing to fail, and then people start getting issues with them and they pull them thinking the distributor's an issue. We actually fell victim to that one ourselves. A friend and I in a big block Chevy had exactly that. We chased a spark issue for quite some days and then found it was just a failed vacuum advance canister. Anyway, way to test them. Suck on them. And guess what? That one's failed. Damn it. You can actually hear it's failed. it hadn't. It has now. Alright, so that's another thing we're going to have to do. Let's ignore that too. It's just one more thing I'm going to ignore. Oh, we've got squirters anyway. Check this out. That's fuel. I have fuel absolutely pouring out of that fuel line. Sorry I can't get a better shot of that, but that's a piece of hard line and that is leaking like hell. I can't tell if that's leaking there or coming from up here. No, that's just leaking right there. It's got a hole in the factory hard line. I'll be buggered. It could have been the brutal nature of which I took it apart. It's a pretty good leak, so we might have to back him back, put him up in the air, and I'll just revisit where I'm cutting that line. If failing that, we all should be good up here, I think, except we still haven't established whether we've got spark. Well, I'll tell you what that does establish. That pump's clearly working because my bottle was there and it sucked it to there, so it was on its way that way. So that pump's fine. Let's just give it another shot without, or actually let's maybe don't give it another shot with shorty open headers throwing a spark out. Righto, let's fix that fuel line first. Okay, so you know when I said if everything goes according to plan, you know I'm editing shit out because nothing ever goes according to plan. Well, the fuel leak, yeah, there's that. And there's the fact that I never plugged the distributor back in after I took the cap off. I was getting that keen, and I don't mean this guy, you saw me plug this in, but how about this guy? You reckon it might run now? Ridiculous. Anyway, I'll go back and put him back up on this hoist. All the Chevy guys are at home, sitting there yelling at the TV, holding their oil filter that they got at birth, going, "You haven't plugged the distributor in, idiot." Yeah, I know that now. Oh yeah, it's obvious when you put a light on it. Look there. How does that happen? Anyway, doesn't matter, it's happened. Let's cut it out. So that might be my first job in the morning. Let's get some fresh fuel line. Drop that. And if it's that bad here, I can't picture it being any better up front, so I might have to get more up there too. There you go, very temporary, probably permanent fuel line. So I'm pulling out all the safety stops and I'm just going to cover that fuel, or what's left of it, with something completely flammable. We'll see where we go now. We've plugged the distributor in. You ever seen that snippet where Michael Jordan's head comes on and it goes, "Stop it, get some help"? That's how I felt. I'm thinking about so many different things, shortcut and trying to get shit done, that I completely missed the distributor plug. What the... Anyway, we'll see where we go now. That's how we'll go now. That's how we'll go now. Instant noise. This should idle if I can get this right. I put that much fuel down it, I don't think I need a choke. I'll just see if that throttle screw, I'll just see if this throttle screw is bottomed out or whether, and this just holds your idle up or down on a carbureted, well, you know, it's fairly well up. give it another crack. A little fuel jug has a tiny bit of fuel in it, so I'm just going to give that a little second more. Or should I plug it in now? I should plug it in now. Plumb that back up, clamp that off, add some more fuel so we can get it run for 2 seconds. Bear in mind, I haven't got the fan. We're just going to get it to run for a second and then we'll build an exhaust, although that might be tomorrow. But anyway, we'll get done what we can get done. Just looking for whatever's going to burn on those little headers when we fire them up. But again, our wire is not routed well, but it's out of the way. Hang on. What if it's in gear? It's got a drive shaft in it. It's got no shifter in it. That'll take that element out. What I mean by that is this thing does not, at this present moment, have a neutral safety switch. So if it's in first, reverse, doesn't matter, it'll still fire. So now our wheels are off the ground. If the wheels start turning, I'll know it's in gear. Maybe that's our job tomorrow. Maybe it's not exhaust, maybe it's shifter. Anyway. Something fell, I heard it, but it's got all pressure straight away, okay? So I'm going to piss all this off, it's just in the way, and they're going to end up marking out on my guard. It's jumping up. The minute I hit the key, the oil pressure's jumping up, so we're fine. Don't need you any longer. A little bit of choke. Righto, she's going to run. We've got yet another leak, but that's transmission fluid this time. So this is really, tomorrow is going to be a hell of a lot of fun in the fact that it's obviously in park, we didn't spin tyres. It's going to run, it's ridiculously loud. So I won't bother saying that I can't hear you rattling or knocking or anything like that. I can't hear anything. So we got that in the nick of time because it's 5 minutes to beer time. But I am going to write myself a list because we've got all the leaks. So the first one is fuel line. What was our other leak? Oh, our oil leak. So just check the oil leak, see if it's still leaking. Of course, I'll do all this once it's cooled down in the morning, find out where that transmission leak is. We've still got one more leak we could probably muster, but we need to do the fan, wire fan. Order exhaust tube. I haven't got any. That was a bad blue. I could have ordered that. Fuel line, oil leak, trans leak, all the leaks. Fan wiring, order exhaust shifter. Oh, the reason I had to try and run round, that would be something that needs doing. Throttle cable and pedal, because the FB originally would have had a linkage, like a rod that ran along the back of the firewall there. So we need to do that. I need a bracket. I actually need a throttle bracket too. I've got to order exhaust, we'll then make exhaust. Bonnet prop, see if I can get that other spring back on that side, shift it over a little, maybe put it on the other side. So bonnet, hinge, that's a little thing, isn't it? That's like, that's a want, not a need. I don't need that. What I need is just to put a seat and a throttle cable in it and no exhaust. No, we've heard it with no exhaust, so now I want to quieten it down, you know, and get it to idle, get it to run. This is not a race car. This is going to be a cruiser with a bit of power. That'll do me for now. That's that thing. Battery clamp. I'm certain there was one here. I'm certain I sat it somewhere, so it's just find that one, it's not buy one. Right, that'll do for our list. And I guess the other wants, not needs, are just tidy up a bit. Start to reroute some of that wiring. Like I said, get our fan ready to do some work. There's a bit of shenanigans down there. I've got a hose running into a piece of exhaust pipe and a 90 then into another hose, so might even have to look at that. But our fuel, oh, that's pretty dirty, straight up, geez. And it's all sitting in the bottom, like, look at that. Chunks, big chunks out of that fuel line. And pretty good to hear that thing. As said, all the precautions went out the window. Every time I did something with it, it just seemed like, nah, it'll be fine. And so just, yeah, I'm ready to chuck an exhaust on it. I was a little bit disappointed though that it has taken so long to get to this point, because you get a couple of days on it and then you might not get back to it for another 3 months, and you'd spend the first half of a day, like with the wiring, figuring out where I left off. And the disappointing bit is, it was so close to firing. Like, it was literally that close. And yeah, it was just, geographically, it was a nightmare. It was just traveling over, no time to spend on it. That'll change. Tomorrow we'll get into that list, get a shifter in there, start tidying up some wiring, make sure it's not going to overheat. But for now, it's a good start, a really good start. It's got a bit of a cam to it too. I was told to explain a little bit about the motor. It's a 400, it's actually slightly oversized, so it's actually a 406. Now, these things back in the day, if you were building, and when I say back in the day, I mean late 70s, early 80s, you wanted to build a small block Chevy, this is the combination you'd try and get. That's why I bought this so long ago and just sat it in the corner. This is a 406, as I said, but it's got double hump fuelie heads, which before all the aftermarket cylinder heads, aluminium heads came out, they're the ones you look for. Best flowing factory heads back in the day, good cleanup, and you could easily get 1 horsepower per cubic inch with a mild cam. That's probably somewhere near where this is at. I would say the valve springs in this, for sitting for so long, will be the only thing stopping it making decent power. But I don't think we're going to rev the hell out of this one. It's got a vacuum secondary carby on it. Actually, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's got a vacuum secondary carby on it and a single plane intake manifold, but it's just what I had. It's just chucked together Frankie. It's a Frankenstein. The best bit is, it's now a Frankenstein that runs. Anyhow, enough talking. I'll see you in the morning. Yeah, I know, it got the better of me. I won't see you in the morning just yet. I've got to find out where this transmission's leaking or I won't be able to sleep. How about the fact that it's got no transmission lines in it? Would it be that? You idiot. You dead set effing idiot. Trans leak. How about just lines? And a cooler. Do you see what I mean? This is me at my worst right now. My absolute worst. This has been over so many years. I got so excited about what was going on up there. That sort of shit does not happen if you get on it, fit the motor today. You know, like I missed that oil line. I would have noticed that going in and would have been thinking buy a mechanical gauge. 6 months later you buy a different gauge because you've forgotten about it. I looked down from the top there, saw that metal line. That's actually the factory fuel line. But if in old Holdens the metal line's coming forward's transmission line, I didn't even look. It has no transmission lines in it. So that little leak there, I'm lucky that's not that big and it's just pumped the whole transmission out. Although now that I remember, when I fitted that motor, I think we tilted it up and tipped a lot of the fluid out, so there's probably no fluid in it, so it's probably just as well I figured that out now. For 2 reasons. 1, I can go and get transmission hose, and 2, if I run it dry for too long, you can do damage to them. Now I'll see you in the morning. It'll be a better day tomorrow. So this morning I've been in and I've got fuel line. I also found some hard transmission lines, but they're that bad. I don't think internally I could get them cleaned up to a standard I'd be that excited about. They're probably full of rust. So I actually nipped the heads off them and I'm just going to wire wheel them up, see if we can't use them, and then just loop some rubber line around for now, fill up the trans, and at least that's out of the way. So I'll get him in the air and we'll get these lines cleaned up and attached. I've ground that down a bit. It's really bad. Got one side fitting at 12. The difficult bit will be, actually I might better clean the transmission fluid off that. The difficult bit I was going to say will be getting a spanner up there to do them up tight. Hard to get at, and now it's just like a random 12 mil. I'll put this shitty one on the bottom. Like the shittier one, they're both shitty. Don't tell me they're a different thread. No, they're right. They're just really, I don't know, pitted from surface rust and just didn't want to go. But they're going now. Well, one is, don't speak too soon. You always do that. That's that. We've got two lines. I think I just stripped that again. For now, I reckon I'm just going to loop that somewhere and just leave it. I don't have a cooler, so I'm not going to worry about trying to run lines to the front or anything. I'm just going to loop it around, get some fluid in it, see if that's actually leaking anywhere else. And then I think we'll start on maybe exhaust, so I can actually hear the thing when it fires. Oh, you can hear it, it's as loud as hell. What I mean is so I can hear that the motor's alright. Seems fine. So it's absolute garbage, but I've just run the top line from there up and over the rail and then back in. I'll eventually run a cooler up the front there for now. That'll just get some fluid circulating so we can actually fill him up and see if he wants to do something cool. The ridiculous bit about that terrible scenario I've got there, actually I better put a zip tie around that. I'll get back to you. Yeah, because the zip tie is going to cover up the evil that you just did. No, what I was going to say was, the ridiculous bit about that is I didn't use the fuel line or transmission line I went and got this morning. I couldn't bring myself to cut it and just loop it round. I thought I'll wait till I get a cooler and then I'll run the new line out to the cooler and cut it. So I've used a crappy piece of old fuel line I found laying around and some crappy fittings that I found laying around. So it's crap. Let's get some fluid in it and then move on. We've still got other things before it drives. We've still got an accelerator pedal, a shifter. It's just one thing at a time. How much do you reckon it'd take? I'm going to start with maybe 3.5, 4 litres. Standard pan, little converter. Even if 4 litres is too much because of the little converter and standard pan, it'll probably leak and then it'll just correct itself. Oh, I drifted everywhere. Now we get a bit of smoke when we start it up. I'll tell you what else I just remembered, that diaphragm in that vacuum vacuum canister, that's what I'm saying, in the canister. Gotta replace that because that was perforated. And the old distributor's gonna come into play again. That's all the vacuum canister is, and they've got a little diaphragm in there. And when the vacuum sucks on this end, it pulls the diaphragm and moves that guy forward, which in turn, if you see this little base plate at the bottom of the distributor there, it pulls more timing in it by moving that plate. That goes there, in like that, and as that arm pulls forward, that plate shifts around. I don't have enough hands to show you right now, but trust me. Can't get it out now. So essentially all it does is pull on that and just pull some more timing into it ever so gently. So I'll knock that cap off, knock the rotor button off and just change out that vacuum canister. That's your vacuum advanced canister. Probably not the biggest concern this car has right now, but it's playing on my mind, so I'm just going to do it. You with me? Just so I can sign off on the ignition's right, fuel's right, transmission's going to work. It's not right, but it's going to work. And then move on to, I don't know, what do you want to do first? Do you want to do exhaust? I need a smaller screwdriver is what I need. Yeah, back to what I was saying. So what do you want to do first? We've got accelerator pedal and bracket, exhaust and shifter. Shifter's cutting, grinding, accelerator pedal bracket is cutting, welding, grinding, and exhaust is cutting, welding, grinding. So either way, we're cutting, welding and grinding. I'll put that little screw there so that when I swing around and knock it off there, I'll never ever find it ever again. Because we like the extra challenge. And that's in there. Oh geez, you can even feel that. So if I suck on that, right, you can see that arm move. I'm reluctant, but if I did the same with that, nothing. Except horrible, horrible stale air. It's a really, really common one with these style of distributor. Righto. Vacuum line. We're making tremendous progress. So I guess the next thing we need to do is work out how I'm going to open this throttle. So I need some sort of a throttle bracket here somewhere, and I guess I can come off that that bolt there, and maybe off here make some sort of bracket. But to figure out how I'm going to make that cable bracket, I would need to know what cable I'm putting in it. Here's our options. These are all I found in the cupboard. That guy was the one I ordered for mucus. That was supposed to be 900 long. Turned up 600, so that's one option, but I think if it was too short for mucus, it's going to be too short for this one, because it's pretty similar distance from the carby to where the throttle's got to be. That guy, I'm going to guess and say that's out of an F100, because that is definitely out of an F100. And this guy here, that's out of the Hilux, which I reckon that's probably the one I'm going to try first of all. For length isn't too bad. If it fits lengthwise, that looks like a pretty easy sort of setup to rig up. And we'll go from there. So I'll check cable length. And it's really going to have to go from somewhere there next to that booster. Obviously the brake pedal is going to be there, so it's going to be over here. There'll be two bolts sort of showing their tip of them through the back of that hinge bracket, so I should be able to figure out that gap there and just drill it from the inside and bring him from there across and round and into here. So I guess we'll get that length, figure out which one to use and start with it. It'll be a matter of... Righto, so the Hilux one I think it's going to do the job. I'll just knock it off that pedal. I said I'd knock it off that pedal, and we'll try that. So if that went there, it's going to be tight. That's it. So we need a hole there somewhere, and then I'll just make that pedal work. And so in here you can see that's one of the hinge bolts. Not sure what's going on exactly there, but there's a nut there and that's bent down. Let's not get into that. And that's the brake booster bolts there. So I need a hole right about there. To do that though, I think I'm going to have to take that bonnet hinge off to even get at it. At least then I can get a square look at it from the engine bay. It'd be easier than taking that master off. Because I know it's only 4 bolts to undo the master and 1 pin for the pedal, but then I've got all the brake lines, so I'm only going to be able to sit it over. I may as well move this guy and then come through somewhere there. Come through right about there. Maybe even if it's got to go on an angle. Even if it's got to sit slightly like that, not straight up and down. She's a tight fit, but I'll get her in there. I might actually mark down the edge of that hinge, just so I don't mount it too close. Get all that out of the way. Trace a line down the end of that, then pull the hinge off. Might have to just lift the whole bonnet off for the minute. I really seriously need to do some wiring on this later, after it drives around the yard and I've got inspiration to do wiring, because wiring sucks. This is not feeling good. Oh, probably because it's got like 60 years of rust and shit on the other end of the thread. You reckon that might be it? I thought for certain I would have had that wrapped around those wires, but anyway, hinges out. And I've got to drill a fairly substantial hole. That's a 14mm hole. It's fairly big. Because see, that doesn't come off. That's part of the cable, so that's got to go through the firewall. That's got to go through the firewall, because that's the pedal clip. But I guess it doesn't matter, because that, well, what's left of that grommet that would actually seal the hole. You can see where it's been there. So anyway, 14mm hole it is. I'll start with a 10 and then work my way up. Even if I've got to die grind it, I'll get something through there. So now just come over here somewhere in as soft a loop as I can. Oh, I can actually come back a fair way, that'll help. I might actually have to mount that pedal first, because if I go mounting this and then find I need more cable to get my pedal closer or further from the floor, that'd suck. Pedal first, I think. What I mean by that is if I mount that cable and then find out I need this guy to be a little further away from that firewall, I'm sort of shooting myself in the foot. So I might mount up this pedal, make a bracket here somewhere. So I'm going to hack that off, mount the pedal, then weld it back on so I can get it right. So we'll just get this in the right spot for my foot first. I was thinking I wouldn't be lucky enough for the factory seat to mount up on the factory floor pan, but of course it will. Just, I think it's going to come over a little. That's pretty close, but Jesus, that's borderline of perfect. So I need that. About that much below the brake and almost directly under the handbrake. Righto, that's easy enough, isn't it? So the bracket I'm going to build is going to drop off here. I'm going to weld it to there. It's going to drop down about 80mm and then go back about 80mm with more or less a right angle bend in it. And so I've just got there, got my 80mm, another 80mm. I'll cut him off, put a 90 in there, and that'll start us off. We might end up modifying it from there, but that'll start me. Here's where we're up to. I did get that bracket eventually done, but I didn't get away with just bending it. I ended up having to cut it there, turn it, step it back towards the firewall. I did leave that weight on it because I guess that helps the pedal drop back. And if I put that cable in, we should now see if we've got enough cable. If I pull it back in the engine bay, we'll see if we've got enough cable now to actually make that work. But that's sitting just above the pedal. That's about where I preferred it when I sat the seat in. And that gives me plenty of throttle travel. We'll see how much cable we got. Cable's a bit shit, but we've got that much, so that much throw. There's no way I'll need that much here. So yeah, we can start making this bracket, but hinge can go back on, bonnet can go back on, and we'll get stuck into that bracket. Actually, I won't put the bonnet back on because I'm going to be leaning in there, but I'll get that hinge in now. That's a pain of a job, so chuck it in, then we'll get into that throttle bracket. And to position this, I think we're going to start about there. Maybe come out off there and up off that guy there. So I might get me flat steel again. So I might get this flat bar again and make a bracket that comes forward and then kicks up, and I'll have a hole in it, and that'll do for these this thread to go through. And then I'm going to have to make a dropper down onto that, and also one coming out off there, just with a hole in it there, up and out. So I'll make this piece first, just a flat piece with a 90-degree bend in it. So I just bent that little guy up, and you put a slot in him there. That's how you can get that cable through your bracket, because you don't want the hole big enough to fit all that through and that nut, because then you've got to somehow get washers on it. So the slot is for the cable, and that slot's in there, and then you do that nut back up, and that's how you clamp it. It's just going to sit facing that way. So the next thing I need, get that out of the way, is one coming out this way, like that. You're watching 25 minutes from now, when I've got all this welded up, I'll be looking for that. And just remind me that's where it is, okay? Alright, so that's now my drop down, my slot for my cable. So I only really need, I can't even bloody see what I'm doing, they're terrible. So I only really need now, is what I'm trying to say, is one to come up from the back there. That's the kick down cable for this Turbo 350. I reckon I'm going to come off that guy. Unless there's a better guy. No, that's probably, it's got two in it, so I don't think it's going to compromise that one holding. I'm going to come up from that. I reckon I'm just going to make a 90, drill a hole in it, and then turn it both ways and see which way it's going to either mate up with here, or land in the middle. But either way, that'll be good enough. Actually pretty happy with that. We'll just weld along there, try and grind that down nice, and happy days. So that's my little bracket on, and I guess I'll duck in once I connect this up and see if we're getting full throttle, and that's pretty much it for the throttle side of things. I guess next is seating. Shifter, seat. Let's see how it goes, see how it feels. Hopefully it won't feel too heavy. So I bought this shifter a fairly long time ago. So I'm kind of reminding myself as I get it out. One of those ones that bolts to the top of the box. It's a very simple sort of a, you know, almost 4-speed looking shifter when you put the leather wrap around it and whatever else. Oh well, let's get into this. So did I mention this was the cheapest shifter I could buy? So this is not a Turbo 350. This is about as good as I can get to dummy it up. This is actually either a 200C or a 300C. I don't actually know which it is, and easily identifiable because it's got the electrical plug there, and also an O-ring in the end of the input shaft there. And the C stands for lock-up converter. That and that are a dead giveaway of that. So I don't know which it is, 200 or 300, but I know it's garbage. But the dimensions are basically the same, and if I sit this guy up there, those holes are not even close. They're supposed to line up with that and that. They're not close. That guy isn't too bad lining up with that, but the Turbo 350 doesn't have that. If you see, it's got that casting mark, but it doesn't have that thread. It's got two down here, there and there, which I think I could probably make a bracket to that, and I'd like to bracket it back here to this side somewhere as well. So maybe back to the modulator. That's another thing. I've got to see where I actually want the shifter. Looks like it's got different positions you can have it, right forward or right back. I might just jump it down off the hoist and just see if I want it right back. Well, I think that's going to be a pretty easy decision. I think I need it as far back as I can, because yeah, the bolts at the back are right there, and so that hole, I'm not saying it's going to line up, but I only have to enlarge that. I won't have to chop out any tunnel or anything like that. Still got to put some tunnel in, not chop it out, but we'll put it right back as far as I can. So undo these guys, mount these brackets up, and then shift it back into here. The first thing will be just get it to all line up. These don't even line up with these two bolts here. They're not even close. I'm sort of going to have to put that in, put that bolt in, and try and flex it all in. Stop and think about it logically, Mike. Look at that bend. If I bent that out further, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. Because when I got it out of the box and I dummied it up, that lever was actually hitting on that, and I bent it out. Well, maybe, look at that bend there. That's bent in. Maybe it's just got squashed in transit. Okay, so that's our first hurdle. All I did was, they were down this way, just bend it up. So essentially bending it up, I'm just widening it out, and then just had to straighten those tabs up, because when I widened it out they were pointing out that way. Just bent them back in. Geez, I'll tell you what, I was worried that it didn't have a brace up the front, and I still am, but geez, that felt sturdy for, maybe that's why it's so thick as steel. If I can get one brace down to that pan on that 350, will be right. And it was about that point in the video, I think I was starting to cotton on that, yep, I was missing a bag of hardware. I did contact the manufacturer. I don't know whether I lost the bag or whether it fell out of the box in freight, but that's what I was missing. Little plug with a thread on it, fits in the side of that round cast. But anyway, back to the footage. I think I cotton onto it later on, but anyway, we'll get back to it. So before I go wasting the rest of the afternoon, because I am going to run out of time on this one today, I reckon I need to set this up. Instructions would be good. We'll live a little, huh? We'll just wing it. That one's definitely not long enough, and that's the next one. I must just have to shorten them right up. Right, so reverse, neutral, drive. Don't think I can get low. Don't really care. So if that's in low, second, drive, neutral, reverse, park. Take out the slop and I reckon that'll work. So right, I'm going to make a bracket. It's going to go from that bracket to this bracket to somewhere approximately here where that has another bolt, but realistically it's pretty sturdy. I want to bend this at 90 without ruining my curve. Block your ears. I meant because it's going to be noisy, not because I'm going to swear at it. So that's my little hoop so far. Just marked a little hole to drill there. Well, I've got to tell you, I actually thought that was going to be an absolute shit show, and you all had front row tickets to that shit show, but that actually went really well. Now all I'm going to do is, I'm shocked by that, clearly. But anyway, that didn't go so bad. My little bend across the top of the transmission there, I've drilled 2 holes, they even line up. And that's just going to do that. Now if I can get that in the transmission, if I can get that on the transmission in the car, then wherever this hole is here, I'm just going to do exactly what I did on that throttle bracket, and that is mount a piece of flat bar there, make it touch this one and weld it in the car, and that's my bracket, and then just trim the edge off. I'm actually really shocked with that. We're working to an exceptional standard today, aren't we? Anyway. So I'm trying to get that shifter down there, and it'll go down there, but that rod is sitting right there. So I'm going to have to just move this hump out of the way. Well, this indent, I have to turn it into a hump, so we can just bash it out of the way. So eventually I got it done back up. I dropped that crush washer there trying to put the shifter back together, I reckon 70 times. I ended up having to do the front one from the top and the back one from the bottom, but I still got to do everything up from underneath. But it's there. I didn't have to butcher too much. I probably could have took less, but anyway, that's what it took. It doesn't have to be pretty, as you know. So we'll get under, we'll tighten the rest up, put my cross brace in. This is going swimmingly. I shouldn't have said that, but I've even managed to get my cross brace in, which, because it was pretty tight, I didn't think I'd be able to get it in there for 1 second. If I ever do use that shitty old 200C or whatever it is, I'll probably use this same shifter, because this shifter is very, very cheap. But remind me, put it on the box before I put the box in the car. Remind me that. I feel like I've been under here for an hour. That shifter took 76 goes to try and put it together. I had to cut an Allen key off shorter because the tunnel's so close, but the upside is it's in there. And I'm 2 bolts away from success. Not really. I've got to move the floor. I'll show you. So I can get my light up there. If you see, there's the shifter, like the selector arm. And I need to push it up. It's actually touching on there, but I need to move this floor. I've moved it fairly well from the top, but I need to put that shaft up here somewhere, and then just beat on that bit. That's the only bit that's touching, but my cross brace is in up there. I've got the shifter in, so it's really only this last Allen key. There's 2 at the back. Allen key, Allen head bolt, whatever it is. Frustrating. And these 2. And I think I've got a selector shaft seal leak at the front of the transmission. Maybe that's why it was empty. If you see there, I think that's where that fluid is coming from. I don't think it's the pan, I think it's above it. But anyway, Worry about that after. Well, it's well past beer time, and all in all, a top day. Got the pedal mounted accelerator throttle cable bracket done. The trans line, well, you know, it's just looped, but it'll work. The shifter's almost done. I've only got to move that floor, put that rod in, check we've got gears, and then technically it'll move. I want to mount the seats, and I want to put an exhaust on it before we go too crazy driving it, just so I can hear what's going on. This hasn't been going for a long time. Anyway, just worried about valve springs and lifters and whatever else. And I know I whined like a little bitch about that shifter initially, but it actually come up pretty good. I don't know whether it was bent in transit, and that's why I was thinking it was all, you know, not going to line up. Just bent it back out in the vise. It bolted up okay, it's mounted there now. You could probably run it without that little bracket that I've made, or almost finished making, but I don't know, I'd like a little bit of support at the front. It seems like a lot just on those two back bolts. Those rods running forward sort of rest on the transmission, but you'd also wonder over time, do they vibrate? A little bit of a cam to it, get a bit of vibration. Would a tap, that'd piss me off, like big time. Yeah, because a rattle or a vibration is this thing's biggest concern. Nope. Anyway, we're close. We're really close. We did have a list there. I suppose I can cross a few things off. I won't cross the shifter off just yet, but we definitely got that throttle cable, throttle bracket, pedal, battery clamp. I found that when I was over there bending that shifter. It was just over on the bench, so that's done. Trans leak, obviously we fixed with those lines, but I've found another one with that. Anyway, we've crossed off a few things. We've got a few things to go, but that's probably it. We're one step closer. I'll see you in the morning. So first thing this morning, we're going to get in and massage the rest of this floor out of the way. Just this lower section here, I knocked from this direction. I've got to get under and bash that rib out, just so I can get that linkage to move without fouling on the floor. And as usual, I'm going to fix it with fire. So that's all the floor here, all clearance. So now that shifter moves freely, and I've got my bracket on, and I just fit up the rod, but it is still too long. But that's okay, because I can cut that to any length I want, really. So I've done those little heim joints up, I guess you'd call them, both to this linkage here, and I've just cut it. Now all I'm going to do, they're both in park, I'm just going to hold them like that, put a tack there and see if we've got gears, because that's the easiest way. That's why. I don't know why, but all the rest of the shifter fitted okay eventually, and I've reserved myself to the fact that I reckon I'm missing a bag of hardware or something for that bracket, but I've got my little bracket there, and I'm going to put a bracket off here. That'll be fine. But that rod is too long, no matter which way I look at it. So we'll just sit him up there and tack him. So that's tacked. So I'll see if I've got gears, and then I'll make my little support bracket. And I've convinced myself I'm missing a bag of hardware. I have to be. So I'm not down on this shifter anymore. I actually don't mind it now. It's very cheap. Fits okay, except for I've got to be missing something. There's no... I googled the shit out of it, and it looks like there should be some plugs or something to fit in those cast holes here. If you see that cast hole there, when I googled it, it looks like a plug should fit in there with a thread or something, and then that bracket, these brackets would bolt on, because there's no hardware for for any of that. That's all that's left. It's just those two, and they're only replacement bolts for the back. They were a replacement for here if they weren't long enough. So anyway, it's all going to work, but I reckon I'm missing something that would have made up their work. So anyway, stop talking, let's get this down. Shift gears, that's what we're doing, shifting gears. So that would be park, reverse, neutral, drive, second, low. Now if I weld my little bracket, then that's us. I'm not going to be able to pretty it up there where it is, but that's okay. Give it 15 minutes, I'll forget about it, and hopefully you will too. That won't be the last of the welder today, because we're still going to mount those seats, and I don't think the original positions are going to line up. I think I want to move it over, so we're going to have to weld some nuts underneath the floor to bolt the seats in. Pull one at least for now, and then exhaust, because like I said, even if I only put a half an exhaust on it, just back to the diff with a muffler, I just want to be able to hear it. You know, you can hear it now, but you know what I mean, it's really loud. I want to be able to hear if it's rattling and clanging and banging and whatever. Alright, let's get into this seat. So that seat is now sitting exactly in the factory marks. And unfortunately, that steering wheel would be aiming at my left tip. I don't want it aiming at my left tip. I've got to go over as far as I can. Which I've got to tell you isn't far. But that's what we're going to do. Yeah, it feels cockeyed. That's not going to fit now. That's the factory steering wheel. That's not going to fit because that's now hitting on the indicators. This FB didn't have indicators. The column had nothing. I think I showed you that. Well, now that FB steering wheel is hitting on that. So that's one more thing. That's okay. We're getting close. Real close. But that ain't gonna work. We're gonna move this chair over first thing. You see the factory mount bracket, it's still here. You see the hole there and a hole there, and they've got a nut on the back of them. But unfortunately I want to go over it as far as I can, which that pad is going to give me enough room, but that one, the seat's hitting up against the tunnel there, so I might have to trim a little bit off the seat bracket and get him over. I'll get it over at least, what's that, 20 mil, 30 mil. And the back ones aren't in the correct spot anyway, because I shortened this pan. That's probably the seat bolt there, but if you see there, that's where I cut a section out of it. Anyway, we'll get it done. Just going to trim down there, I think, so I can get that right up hard against that tunnel. Give me a little... How's the back going to go though? Oh yeah, it'll be right because it steps in. That's all stepped in. I have to make sure I put my seatbelt back in as well. It's a lot of mucking about for 20 mil, but it's going to ship me up the wall sitting like that. Well, it's not like that, it's pointing about here. I just want to shimmy it across. Well, there's nothing close to the tunnel. That tail shaft's quite a distance away, so that bit might get the old blowtorch and the knockometer, I think. that's much better. Yeah, at least now you're sitting in front of the speedo. Column's right in front of you. Totally worth it. So I'll let them cool, bolt my seat in, drill some back ones, do the same again from underneath. Weld nuts on there. Happy days. And that one, like I said, I'm just going to use the factory mounts there. It's only 15 mil. You're in front of the glove box. You're not going to notice that it's not exactly symmetrical to this one. Whatever. We now have bolted in seats. And they're mint too, with their amazing trim. Everything works. I don't know if I love headrest or no headrest. Kind of like the idea of the low back, but it looks a bit silly without it, so I'll find the other one. But time to move on. One, I have to find a steering wheel, because like I said, that's EH column, and that's not working with the FB steering wheel. The shifter's done, so I think we're underneath now. We need to get back underneath and sort out an exhaust, because as I said, I want to quieten it down a little bit. It's ridiculous at the minute. And here's what we've got to work with. I've got a set of new flanges and a little bit of new tube, but I'm going to use that muffler box and I guess anything I need out of this junk. And from the rear, I guess we've got to bring it to this bracket. So I've got to cross that side pipe over and then come down this side because of the fuel tank. So I'll just go 2 into 1, the muffler box there and over the diff. You never know, I might stop at the muffler box for now and worry about over the diff later, but we'll see how far we get. The tricky bit's going to be, I've got to come down off here and then go through that little hole there, and the same on that side. But I've only got 2 flanges. So I guess we sort of need to come down along here and veer over into that gap there. Could get a bit intricate. I don't know, maybe I'll cross it over here, move that fuel line of course, to cross over behind the transmission there, rather than trying to come down and cross over under here. I might go all the way back and then across there and then out through there. There's another bracket there I can use. How do I want that to go? I need it to kick out that way, and I'd need that to kick back. And this is off, the old Statesman. If you remember the old Statesman, I found about here a Coke can with a hose clamp around it, fixing a leak, which was amazing. So we put a full exhaust on that one, but it's only steel. We'll sort her out. See what I can't do. See, maybe that shape there, and then come off there back the other way. And that's 2 inch. So we're going to go 2 inch off these little headers, back, join it together, and 2.5 to the rear of the car, somehow. We'll see what we can do. Geez, I tell you what, this could be amazing. It could go terribly too. So the first 2 bends I've got, one's a little bit sharper than the other, but that might actually work okay because the starter's on this side. And I've got to get down and around it. Yeah, that one will work okay actually. I'd have to remove the exhaust to take the starter out, but that's alright. I've got to lower the sway bar as well, I suppose. Yeah, that's alright. here's where I'm up to. I actually think I'm going to pull up for the day. It's getting late in the afternoon and I'm to the point where I'm either going to do something really rough and cause headaches for myself, in the fact that these two pipes come up really good, but to get it in past the starter, you just start out there and feed him up like that. And it's good. It weaves its way down. I got to the back cross member. I'll just chuck these nuts on and I'll show you. I'm not kidding, it has come up good. Like, tremendously good really for what I was expecting, and that's why I'm going to pull up. That doesn't make any sense, but I'll show you why. So we got our first bends, and then we're coming under the sway bar, along beside the rail, and then we're pretty much landing right about there, right underneath that groove, notch, whatever. And I've got the same on this side. If you see, I cut that pipe in the middle. If you remember, that was bent that way and then it bent out again. I just cut it and rotated it, and again tap that guy down. So if you look at them, they're actually pretty good. That one I can come straight down and take it out, but I've only got 2 flanges. You can see the back half of the exhaust is going to be 2.5, or it is going to be 2.5. Well, that's only 2 inch. And I need to put flanges here where this crossover, because if I just put a bend in it here, which I have got some, I've got that guy I could still cut up, but that's 2.5. So I'd have a dramatic change in pipe from 2 inch to 2.5. And if it came across here in one piece, I can't rotate it the way I just showed you to get it in. So I'm actually going to have to, if I ever want to take the exhaust off, I've got to remove the sway bar. Not a big deal, I guess. It's only really 2 bolts there, 2 bolts there. You might be able to drop it down enough, but I think I'm just going to make it hard for myself. So I'm going to get some flanges tomorrow morning at the exhaust shop and put here 2 inch flanges, and I'm going to get a 90 here and maybe a 45 to bring in here. So it'll be another 2 inch here, a 45, a 90, and then here's where it'll flange 2 into 1 into a 2.5 inch back to here, muffler there over the diff, or before the diff, but you get the idea. So like I said, it is actually coming up pretty good, and that's why I want to stop for once. I think I want to try and make that better. Flange there, 90-degree bend into a 45 here, coming back where it'll join. Anyway, you get the point. Pulling up. I sort of can't think of a reason why I'd need to take it off, and I guess if I did just keep going, like I could always drop that sway bar, but am I just beating my head against the wall? I don't know. It is getting late. It's nearly beer time. So I'm just thinking, just for once, I'm going to slow up. I'll knock off 5 minutes early today, get up early, get to the exhaust shop, a couple of flanges, a couple of bends, and then it'll have more or less 2 headed tubes, a flange, a Y pipe, a flange, and a muffler. And, you know, tailpipe if I go that far, whichever. I think it'll just be easier for the sake of getting a couple of flanges. But we've kind of got an exhaust system, so you know what that means. We better start it. It's kind of one of those days where you didn't get as much done as you thought you would. So I kind of need the little kicker of making some noise, I think. estimating this thing. That sounded pretty rowdy. Put a smile on my face, that's for sure. Anyway, I'll see you in the morning. And that's where it all turned to shit. I've never had to do this before, but this one is going to be a 2-part episode, a to be continued, because there was just so many little things that popped up. It was just going to get so long, but not a total loss. We did get it running. We're almost ready to drive. But the good thing about the next episode is you won't have to wait ages for it. It is already filmed. And I will give you a little teaser as to what's in it. Frankie's back next episode. I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching. Start all that again because it's too much. You've done too much talking. Trace it. If you got to trace it, you just said it, you can. Toyota. Oh my God, have a third go at it. Who designed this shit? Dust under here is crazy. Fucking walking in transmission fluid. Thanks, mucus. Retarded. Absolutely retarded.